Senator Antic.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Now, the Morrison government's priority is, of course, the safety of the public, and along with that goes the safety of aged care residents and the quality of care that's provided to same. Now, the effects of this pandemic have, of course, been serious and they have been tragic. And I think we all acknowledge that through this crisis, the crisis has been well managed by this government, but the loss of life has, as always, been tragic. So I'd like to commence by expressing the opportunity to express my sympathies to the families and the loved ones who've tragically lost lives in the last 6 months. It goes without saying, of course, that every death is a tragedy. But of course, it goes deeper than that. Many other Australians are doing it tough through isolation, they're struggling financially, or just struggling with the realities of the world in which they now find themselves. And so, for these reasons, it strikes me as being simply extraordinary that any one group of people would try to politicise a situation like this. Particularly over the last week, the attempts by the ALP to play politics with the memory of people's lives has been as staggering as it has been shameful. But of course, drawing more deeply into the equation, you can understand why it is that those opposite would seek to behave in this way. Because, Madam Acting Deputy President, we know that those opposite are hopelessly divided and devoid of a coherent agenda. And while we on this side of the chamber seek about getting on with the business of fighting the virus, delivering an economic lifeline to Australians, reopening the economy, building confidence and momentum with the economy and guaranteeing Australia's national security, those on the other side are busy fighting amongst themselves and failing to learn the lessons of elections past. And what do I mean by that, Madam Acting Deputy President? Well, to the extent that you did, I'm glad you asked, because only this week we've seen 2 examples of that which I've outlined. And of course, the first was the news this week of the extraordinarily named Labor Environment Action Network, or LEAN as it's been called, which is a campaign, I believe, in Victoria asking people to throw away their gas-powered household appliances. Doesn't strike me as being a policy very good in the middle of one of the coldest winters we've seen, for the elderly as well, for the side of politics that are claiming to be the friends of the elderly. And of course, we've got Mark Butler from my home state of South Australia and Joel Fitzgibbon going toe-to-toe on Labor's energy policy. And what it shows? They're hopelessly divided, looking for a distraction. Then yesterday, we heard allegations of leaking to the press. Can you believe it, Madam Acting Deputy President? Leaking to the press by members of this chamber. And it was reported on Sky News that Labor's Senators O'Neill and Keneally had what was described as a tense altercation on Monday. At some point, I didn't hear it, but it was somewhere over your left shoulder, Madam Acting Deputy President, and it all related to Ms O'Neill's entitlements. She reportedly was accused of leaking stories about the entitlements and visits to Tasmania when they met inside the corridor outside this very chamber. Once again, hopelessly divided and devoid of an agenda. So it's not surprising at all that those opposite are trying to run lines against the government, and it's not surprising at all that they're trying to distract from their own hopeless and divided opposition. But to put a bit of a positive spin on this, Australia is, of course, facing an extraordinary health challenge, and it's unfortunate that in circumstances where there are large clusters of transmission in a community, it is very, very hard to keep the virus out of aged care facilities. We know that. That's a simple fact. Those opposite love to preach the politics of evidence-based policy, but they like to choose the evidence based on their own agenda. So these are some real facts that will assist those opposite to understand the very real facet of what is actually happening here. Because the Morrison government is committed to providing an unlimited amount of surge workforce in facilities that have had an outbreak. And in fact, Commonwealth-funded surge staff have been deployed across to Victorian aged care services to date. ADF personnel are on site in many residential facilities, with additional ADF clinical reserve staff available for deployment. So I think it's instructive, Madam Acting Deputy President, to run a fact check. And I know those opposite love a fact check. And in fact, the one fact check they love the most is an ABC fact check. So I'm going to do something similar to that, except this one is going to be based in real facts, not partisan facts like we see on a national broadcaster, because these are real facts. No country has been able to avoid an outbreak, as I said earlier, in residential care when there has been widespread community transmission of the virus. And in fact, Australia's total death rate as a proportion of cases is 2.1%. Now, once again, it's instructive to understand what that means in real terms, because if we compare that to the United Kingdom's figures, they have a rate of 13.1%. Now, my maths has never been great, Madam Acting Deputy President, but that is significantly higher for the benefit of Senator Polley there, who seems to need it reiterated. But in any event, it's also instructive to point out that 3.2% in the United States, Senator Polley, 3.2% is also higher than here. This is the non-ABC fact check. This is a real fact check. Total aged care spending under Labor, when they left office, $13.3 billion when they left office, not long enough, compared to $22.6 billion this year under the coalition. Once again, Senator Molan, my maths not outstanding, seems to be a largely superior sum, a largely inflated sum, but also that is going to rise to $25.4 billion in 22-23. And what we see there is an extra $1.2 billion of support. Only those opposite could call a $1 billion a year increase a cut. Extraordinary stuff. And by the way, this is the same party across the way here which planned for $387 billion in new taxes at the election, but, notwithstanding that enormous tax grab, had no plan for additional funding for home care, aged care or mainstream residential care. Extraordinary stuff. So when it comes to policy, the ALP, those opposite, are hypocritical. When it comes to aged care, those opposite are hypocritical. Every year under the coalition government, these sectors have increased their funding. The Aged Care Workforce Industry Council work continues to progress under the leadership of the ACWIC, which was formed in May last year under this coalition government. And additionally, this government continues to improve vocational education training with the Aged Services Industry Reference Committee by designing new VET qualifications for aged care workers. And then there's the Serious Incident Response Scheme. And the Australian government's investing $23 million to introduce this scheme for residential aged care from 1 July 2021. There are so many different funding schemes here that I could talk to you about. I won't have time, Madam Acting Deputy President, but we are conducting a fact check, and I love facts, and I know those opposite love facts as well, so I'm going to continue to roll through them. These are achievements of this government, this coalition government, since the calling of the Royal Commission. This government has invested $3 billion since the 2018-19 budget into home care packages, released 14,275 new residential care places, including 13,500 residential places and 773 short-term restorative care places, invested $21.9 million for my aged care operating costs. The list goes on. I could continue. I will continue. And in fact, this government has established $17.1 million in a specialist dementia care program, $21 million in 13 research projects that will focus on risk reduction, prevention and tracking of dementia. Dementia, Madam Acting Deputy President, is Australia's second leading cause of death. This is not the information which fits the narrative being run by those opposite. In fact, this is the information which shows very clearly that those opposite are simply attempting to distract the Australian people from their own disunity and lacking policy agenda. The Morrison government, in the meantime, as is evidenced by this fact check, is getting on with the job of protecting Australians and protecting the aged.
Thank you, Senator Antic.